Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cast Dice, the podcast that explores the great big wild world of tabletop gaming that exists today. It has been said one or two times, mainly on this podcast, that we are in the middle of a gaming renaissance. There are just too many good games out there that we can spend our hobby time and our hobby dollar on. And it literally just leads to a serious case of fear of missing out for me. I absolutely want to play all the good games out there, and I know a lot of the guests who I have on this show do too. And I guess that's the purpose of this podcast, is to sort of explore the greater gaming industry, some of the cool stuff that's out there, and talking about the things that we love. Now, oftentimes we have people on this cast and we talk about, you know, the games that we're playing and we're enjoying. But today we're going to talk to one of the guys who writes the games. Now, I know we've done that a couple times recently, but I'm very excited to have our guest on today because not only is he from the great state of Massachusetts, but he's a guy who has just put out Osprey's newest Blue Book, or I should say Osprey's put out his game as part of their Blue Book series. It's a game that if you follow the Cast Dice Facebook page, you would have seen me posting a lot about recently, Zona Alfa. And of course, I'm talking about Patrick Todoroff. Patrick, welcome to Cast Dice.
Gosh, thank you for having me here. It's really an honor. It's astonishing to be here, to be honest with you.
Man, it's funny that, you know, we come from less than an hour's drive from one another.
Right.
And now
right. I would definitely be inviting you down for the weekly game sessions here.
Right. But now I live literally if you drew, a laser light through the middle of the earth, I'm on the opposite end. And now here we are talking about the game you just put out. It's funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right on. Now, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the best way. I do like to do a little synopsis about the games if folks haven't heard of it. And because it is a brand new game, I thought a little explanation for those who hadn't heard might be a good thing. And I sat down to write an explanation, and I ended up writing, and for the listeners of the show, you're probably not surprised, something like 5 pages of what am I going to do to say this? And then I just looked at the blurb at the back and went, oh, there it is in 2 sentences. So if you'll excuse me, rather than doing my long-winded version, I'm just going to read part of your blurb and we'll talk about it. Zona Alfa is a set of simple, fast-play skirmish rules for scavenging, exploring, and surviving in the near future post-apocalyptic Eastern European setting. Players take control of crews of loners, misfits, and thrill-seekers who are desperate enough to risk the exclusion zone for valuable artifacts and the salvage it contains. Boom. I mean, short, sharp, and boy, does that summarize the contents of this book. That is such an interesting, and I almost want to say the word niche setting for a game system. But the more I dug into this, the more there is, and I think I just wasn't paying attention. Tell us a little bit about how you got the idea to put a game in this universe.
Okay, well, if you're familiar with the setting at all, you know that I lean really heavily into the Stalker and the Metro 2033, settings, the universes there, which are founded on Roadside Picnic and the movie Stalker. And so that was the first, okay, so Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl was the first sort of open world sandbox game I had ever encountered. And I was so fascinated by the thought that they had mapped out 30 square kilometers around the old nuclear power plant. And that they had set a game in this place that you could, it had day and night cycles. It had wandering, packs of dogs and bandits and things. And it was so different when I got it from the usual sort of run and gun with 9 Inch Nails playing in the background and you're just blasting everything. And this was like moody and brooding, and there was lightning and clouds, just shadows of clouds moving across the fields and wolves howling in the distance. And then you get like a bottle of vodka and a Makarov, and they say, hey, help us clear this old factory of bandits. And I was instantly hooked. Mm-hmm. It was so fascinating to me. And so then the tabletop gamer in me was like, okay, I got to turn off my computer now because I've spent days wandering the zone. Yeah. And I need to translate this, if I can, to the tabletop? How do I capture that aesthetic? Where am I going to find miniatures? Where am I going to find terrain? How am I going to sort of recreate some of these elements on the tabletop?
Yeah.
And that was sort of my first attempt at translating that universe, that world onto the table.
And as you say, I mean, the detail they went into in that game is amazing. Now, we talked a little bit about this off air, but I absolutely love Fallout, and I played Fallout 4 quite a lot when it came out, and then afterwards because I'm very slow. But quite a few elements or places in that game are actually places in Boston, which of course we are both from. But
Right.
They sort of compressed all of the locations, and they weren't true representations. But to look at the creators of this game, as you say, they accurately mapped out 30 kilometers around the Chernobyl power plant to the point where people could recognize, not just one or two locations, but they could actually navigate around it and go, oh, yes, that was that.
Right. There's a story that they took the plant manager, the computer game company took the plant manager in, and they gave him a virtual tour of the parts of the landscape. And he was like, oh, yeah, no, I recognize all this from my commute to work.
That's crazy.
Like this bend in the road, this tree. And I'm like, oh, my God, really? That's fascinating. Now, to the extent that it's completely accurately mapped out, I mean, I don't know. But
right.
for that plant manager to recognize his daily commute, that's astonishing to me. I mean, I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah. Right?
On top of it being a really cool game.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that eye for detail, and what I like is that you've taken. I mean, Blue Book games are sort of famous for being sort of short, sharp rule sets. Like you only get a certain number of pages, and you have to stick to that, and you need to make these games. They're, Osprey Blue Books they're short, they're thin books, they have soft covers. And so sometimes when you read those books, authors can go sort of one of two ways. Either sometimes it's a very generalized game that, it might be fun for a beer and pretzels sesh, but sometimes lacks the depth, and other times they get super micro. They're in trying to make a skirmish game, it gets super micro focused, and I think that sometimes they tend to bog down a little bit. Games like Gaslands for me was a perfect representation of the Blue Book game that sort of threaded down the middle. It had teeth. It had, tactics. It had some depth to it, but also was easy to pick up and play. And I'll be honest, I haven't played Zona Alpha yet, but I've read through the book quite a few times now, and I've sort of pushed some models around the tabletop and rolled some dice just to make sure I had my head around how the basics work. And my God, for a game that is a thin Blue Book game and is easy to sort of understand the mechanics of, this has some real depth to it that is really fun. And I think you did a great job of taking that sort of universe, and while the universe isn't necessarily written about in the book, I think the art has done such a good job of marrying up with what you've written. You don't have to have pages of fluff. Now, there's a lot of fluff written into the mission, so to speak, but you don't have like 16 pages of background at the beginning. You don't need to, right?
Correct. And thank you. That's quite a compliment. But Sam Lomond, the artist, did just this outstanding job. I remember getting the proofs, the rough sketches and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is so awesome.
Right?
He just did a great job. I mean, he really did. And the guys at Osprey were really good, and Sam did a fine job. And so I had to, my aim was not to sort of reproduce the game or the roadside picnic or anything like that,
right?
But was just sort of capture that aesthetic, sort of bake in the feel of the place, and then give gamers sort of a toolbox. I'm huge on narrative gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a toolbox. You have a better sense of your own collection and your own play preferences than I do.
Right.
So here's a toolbox. You use your imagination. You take this and run with it. You build something with it. I'm not going to tell you how to game. I'm not going to tell you necessarily what to game. You just take this and have fun, build something with it.
Totally.
Build your narratives, build your missions, create your crews and go.
Yeah.
Go wander around like I did when I first got the computer game.
Exactly. And I think the fact that you have, I mean, it's a miniature agnostic game as well. So it means that, as you say, go to your collection, pull things out. And when I got this, I immediately went to my collection and went, okay, what do I have? And I pulled out a handful of zombies. I pulled out a couple ghouls from various game systems. And I pulled out a giant pack of wild dogs and went, boom. All I need now is to paint an actual crew of guys to, go exploring, and Bob's your uncle. I'm ready to go.
Right. When I first started writing it and trying to do this, I was taking like modern Russian miniatures and then cutting off their heads and putting pig iron production gas mask heads on them and finding bits from other old Necromunda kits or whatever, and then I painted up crews from the different factions from in the Stalker game, Clear Sky, Freedom, Duty, Monolith. And so I had these little, like the assault group Modern Russians or Eureka miniatures, Modern Russians, modified and painted up and ready to go just because I was so into it. And then Lead Adventure did their last project line. Igor Karpov started sculpting some stuff, and I just about died for joy. I was so amazed at the job that he did, that he captured that Stalker Metro feel. But yes, it is miniatures agnostic. Yes. Oh, so there's a little plug for Lead Adventure there, but it is miniatures agnostic. And that's the idea, that you take what you have in your collection. At some point you bought the game. It's your game now. It's your zone. So go have fun.
Yeah, and that is reflected in the rules. I mean, sometimes in rule sets, there's the little paragraph of, make sure that you have a gentleman agreement and have a good time when you're playing this. But sometimes that can leave, if you're gaming, you'd be like, but how do you actually resolve issues and things like that? But I think the way the game works is very much, I mean, you really do go out of your way to say, this is your gaming experience, and you give us the tools to sort things out. I think without it being, as you say, because of the way it's narratively driven, I can't imagine this being a system where you're going to, get into those arguments. Just the way that game is tonally written.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope not, because there's lots of things to get upset about in this world, and I don't think Toy Soldiers is one of them, So, right, and we're getting together to have a good time. Again, I'm not a competitive gamer. I know some competitive gamers. I actually tend not to game with them. I like them as friends, but we don't game together because I'm just not that kind of person.
Right.
For me, it's all about the story. It's all about people engaging in the story as it unfolds on the tabletop. And it's like, I don't care if I lose a guy, if it was a good moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Right. If my opponent made that impossible shot, I'm like, ooh, good shot.
Yeah, man.
Good for you. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, totally. It makes for good stories. I mean, if everything happens according to the way the odds work, gaming would be really boring.
Right.
Yeah. You got to have some out there moments so you have something to say over the beer later after the game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what there's another gamer said to me once, if after the gaming session you talk about the rules, it wasn't a good game.
Yes.
But if you talk about the game, then you had a good game.
Yeah, man.
If you talk about those moments and that, those things that charge up the hill, that last stand, whatever it might be, then you're like, yeah, that was a good game. That was a good session.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, man, I couldn't agree more.
That stuck with me.
Well, I think that's a good
Zona
segue.
Alfa.
Oops, sorry. I think that's a great segue to actually talking about the rules.
Okay.
Sorry. You were saying, I think I interrupted you. Zona Alfa what?
No, I was just saying, so I was trying to get myself focused also, thinking out loud.
Yeah.
So yes, the rules. What do you want to know?
Well, let's start with this is a skirmish game. So what can people expect as far as building a crew? Now, as far as I understand, you can have 3 types of models, and you can have crews between, was it 4 and 10 or 11 models in your crew?
Yeah, depending on how you want. I tried to sidestep the whole economy and min-max game by letting people choose according to the number of available actions in the squad.
Right.
So there are troop quality levels. So you have green troops that can only do one thing per turn when activated. Hardened, sort of experienced troopers who can perform 2 actions when they activate. And then you have veterans who can do 3. Exactly. And so if you're and there's a Russian word, krabrost, and I probably just butchered that, but
it's all good.
Which
this is the right
stands
show
for
that.
courage, or I'm gonna have Russians sending me nasty emails now, which is Russian for courage or mettle, and so that's just the term that I picked up, and so you can have a 12K squad.
That's right.
And those actions you can spend however you want. If you want an all veteran crew of 4 guys, 4 super elite experienced guys, go for it. If you want to have, a leader and then a whole bunch of green noobs, the noob squad, running in waving AKs, you can do that too. But they're not going to be able. You're going to have more of them. You're going to out activate in terms of warm bodies, but the number of actions available, at least at the start, is the same.
Right. Oh, that makes sense.
So that's how it's built, and that's how I sort of sidestepped the whole economy and numbers crunching and everything like that. So so troop quality levels is one of the things that I concentrated on. The other sort of 3-legged stool here, the other leg of the stool is streamlined stats.
Yes.
So there's model stats and there's weapon stats. And I didn't differentiate between melee and ranged. I sort of let the weapon do that. So
exactly.
I assume that every soldier is trained to a certain level of proficiency. And if you give them a knife, they're only going to be able to attack in melee.
Right.
But they're and if you give them a AK, then that's a range shot.
That's right.
So models have there's 4 basic stats: combat ability, armor, movement, and will.
That's right.
Weapons, on the other hand, now it gets to what you equip that model with. They have firepower, damage, and range.
Well, I love that because it means that you could have a really good weapon, for example, or I guess good weapon is relative in this game, isn't it? But it's the strength of the weapon. It's not the person who's firing it, right? It very clearly differentiates between inexperienced troopers using assault rifles and it's a very different feel from, say, a veteran using assault rifle, but they're still going to have the same strength weapon, right?
Correct. The weapon is the same strength, but they're going to be better at handling it.
Right.
So their combat ability is going to be greater than the green troop, but they can't inflict any more damage necessarily. They're just better at putting rounds on target.
Right. Well, let's talk about you've mentioned that each level of experience, so to speak. In bolt action, I think we referred to that as veterancy, and I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast like bolt action. So, it's different but similar in that you have your veteran, you have your in bolt action it would be called regular, but in your case it's hardened, and then you have your rookie. Now, unlike bolt action, you do get more activations. Now, how can people spend those activations? Because like most skirmish games, you have your usual move, you have your shoot, but there's some nice crunchy differentiating maneuvers that you can give models that really breathes life into this.
Well, you've got all the standard actions in a war game, in a skirmish war game. So move, shoot, climb. The guys can aim. They can go on alert, which is sort of which is Overwatch, as it were. Run, jump, fight, shoot. You can interact. You can use something. You can remove a pinned counter. Again, it's pretty basic actually, as to what what the crew members can do, what your models can do.
True, but a lot of times with these games, you get people who have very fixed, characters on the tabletop, for example. I'm going to use the word character, not model, or I guess model since it's a skirmish game. But everyone tends to have the same number of activations. But because you have hardened or veterans who have more activations, as you say, being able to remove those pin markers, if you are working with a bunch of rookies, that's very valuable. And also being able to, move, interact, grab the pouch or hit the switch, and then maybe attack something that's about to come at you if you're a veteran. Well, that's valuable versus, the rookie who might just run up to the console and then just stand there like a potato while everyone else is coming at them because they're trying to figure out what to do. I think that really does give extra value to the veterans.
Well, we have played. Again, when I sat down with the first few iterations of the rules, I gave them to my gaming group, and I'm like, okay, let's try to break these.
Nice.
So let's put it on the tabletop. Let's tweak everything we can. And so we've played different games where one of the guys took a single leader and then 9, green rookies, and then another guy took all veterans, and then other people took a mix of veterans, hardened, and green rookies. And in the end, so you're trying to figure out like what is the balance between warm bodies and activations.
Right.
And so usually consistently the players with the mixed crews where you had a couple of veterans, a couple of hardened guys, and who were shepherding a couple of rookies. Once you learn to use it right, and the game is very deadly, so once you figure that part out, you can't go rushing in. Those are the ones that prevailed in the end because they had the balance between, the number of people on their squad to absorb some hits and the actions to still get something done.
Exactly.
Like the veteran crews always started out really well, but once they, lost a guy to a casualty, they found themselves in a real tight spot. They can't get things done like they thought they could.
Right.
Because now you're down to 3 guys.
Yeah.
Or whatever it might be. So you've got to, you can play and you can win if you have an all veteran squad to start, but you have to play much differently than the guy who's got the green rookies.
Yeah.
So, yes, it is. I like the idea of the different troop qualities, and it leads to some very interesting moments, especially once you add in certain skills. Like the leader of your crew can always, he can transfer actions. He can, shout out an order to a guy. So he has 3 actions, but he can give them to people near him. So he can order those rookies. He can make good use of his leadership ability and order those rookies to do more than they can on their own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nice. And I like how by sort of streamlining the character, quote unquote, character creation by having sort of 3 classes to pick from by experience. Everyone's a basic human, right? But if you have that, then you tease it out with those skills, as you said. And even though the weapon list isn't necessarily 16 pages long, it's a very succinct list, but there's nice variation in there as well, so you can have some variety in your crew. So you start with very basic characters. Which level character do I want? You add a few skills, you add some weapon options, but then if you have factions that go into that as you're playing the game, maybe in a campaign, all of a sudden there are little bonuses that you can have that aren't necessarily, groundbreaking, but add that variety. So there's that breath of life that really just gives you some choice, which is really nice to see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. Again, you had mentioned, trying to fit everything into 64 pages.
Right.
You've got the Osprey Blue Book format. So I'm kind of like, all right, so how can I capture, flavor and give gamers options to make their characters and their crews distinct, and yet still keep it streamlined, so that it's quick and easy to get on the table, to teach somebody and to play. It's not bogged down. You're not flipping through charts. You're not constantly. It doesn't take 6 rolls to resolve combat. You don't have to track a lot. So like, how do I walk that, that sort of tightrope, walk that line so that it has flavor, but it's also simple.
Right.
I mean, and again, I don't know someone, I'm familiar with firearms, and so the AK-47 is about as simple as you can get.
Right.
It's as a firearm. It's rugged. It's reliable. It's not perfect for everything, but it does its job well. And so I kept thinking like this. I want this to be simple and reliable. I want it to work. It's not going to make everybody happy. It's not going to do everything, but I want this set of rules to work and to be rugged and reliable.
Right.
On the table for people to, to create their own missions and run with them into the zone.
Right. And I like so the way the characters feel for this, and excuse the comparison and going back to the video game, but it almost feels a little video gamey because with equipment, for example, so you have your basic trooper, you have, as you said, the skills, and you have the weapons, and then how the faction bonus kind of works into that. You sort of gives it a little bit more character, but then you have equipment on top of that, and there's just a simple equipment list. There's 3 basic categories: basic, advanced, and special. But you have things like binoculars, gas masks, toolkits, scopes, chest rigs, Kevlar plates. And what those allow you to do, they give you, it's literally one line of description of what it allows somebody to do. So it's very simple. You don't have to go digging through, and you don't have to read, reams of text to see what each thing does. But each one has a very subtle but important impact on the tabletop. So again, each character has its own sort of feel and flavor because of the equipment they're carrying on top of everything else. But it because you have those 3 slots, and because it feels so simple, it almost feels like a video game where, like, okay, I'm going to put this on this guy, and it gives him this ability. But again, it keeps things short, sharp, and really simple to play out on the tabletop, but allows you to have cool things like, awesome, I'm going to have a gas mask on this guy, or cool, I've got electric juice to drink if I need it, or a med kit, or a red dot sight on my sniper rifle. So there's, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to, thank you for saying that, because that was my intention. I wanted it to be, again, you can flavor to taste, but I want it to be simple.
Right.
So that people can get playing without having to read, some massive tome and memorize it and keep the book with them and have, 6 different markers in the book where you're like, okay, I got to flip to page 17 now.
Yep.
Because he can, all right. So I want it to be simple. I want people to get into the game quickly. And then I think the rules should support the narrative, the story behind the mission, instead of get in its way.
Right.
Exactly. That's my hope. That's my hope anyway.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, let's get to the missions and talk about the zone itself. But before we do that, I want to quickly point out that there's a crew roster page on the last page of this book. That's great that if you photocopy it a couple times, you have, enough for your entire crew, and you can just cut them out. And as a primary school teacher, I'm going to laminate it. And you have your cards on the edge of the table, so you don't actually necessarily need to bust open the book a whole lot. It's all right there in front of you, which I think really helps to make that skirmish experience easy.
There is Osprey has put the stat sheets up online at their website.
Oh, cool.
And we have them also over there's a Facebook group called Stalker 7. Mm-hmm. And so they're there. There's a quick reference sheet there, and there are these sort of 2-up stat cards for people as well that you can get in the file section of the group. So I know not everybody does Facebook. I'm also an older generation, so Facebook is I'm not on Facebook a lot, but I do use it for things like this. And so it's there, and Osprey has them on their blog as well.
Nice. Well, let's quickly plug that group again, because I'm a member of that group, and I think it is absolutely great. There's a lot of people not only posting their hobby progress and their ideas for the game, but the file section, as you say, is invaluable. And, there's little cool ideas, contests, and, you get to see, some really creative terrain as well. So that's Stalker 7 if you are on Facebook. And if you're looking for it, its label is Stalker 7, a haunt for Zona Alpha, Hardwired, and other skirmish war games. And we will get to Hardwire at the end of this. But so again, Stalker 7. So, and that's the number 7. So if you go there, go to Facebook, you'll find it. It's a great group. I think you'll recognize a lot of the faces from the Cast Dice page / a lot of other wargaming pages who, folks, the who's who is there. So yeah, check it out. It's a great community, people sharing ideas. It's cool.
Yeah, we had our first contest, the terrain contest, and I was just ridiculously impressed by the stuff that people made. I mean, it's humbling, it's inspiring, it's just amazing. And people were into it, so I've got the guys here who, a couple of them are members of the Facebook group, but they didn't enter anything. So the guys here are the judges along with me.
Nice.
So, and it's been tough. We already had like this past week, Tuesday night, we're already like sitting here arguing in front of the computer screen going, yeah, but I like that, that one. I'm like, no. What about this one? And they're like, oh yeah, that's cool too. So yeah, it's good. It's very good. It is a very good group. And so I feel fortunate to, just be a part of it and watch it.
Right. So, well, you're also interacting. You're giving, I mean, it's good to see authors, interacting with their community. I think it is sort of one of those telling marks of a good modern game is when people interact with the people who are playing it.
I'm a gamer.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a gamer. I mean, I have been a gamer since I was 13.
Yep.
So, that's when I first fell in love with toy soldiers. So, I like this. It's not just something, I get to do this. I mean, that's the cool thing. Right. And so me being a gamer, it all comes out of that. The fact that I enjoy this game and I enjoy the setting and I enjoy, cool models on the table. So, it makes perfect sense to me to be a part of it, to dive right in and say, hey, thanks for enjoying it. And isn't this cool? Like I get to share this experience with other people.
Yeah, man.
So anyway, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not just kind of, blowing smoke.
No. Yeah.
So anyway.
I hear you, brother. I wasn't expecting, to be completely honest, if I'm going to put my hand on a Bible here, I wasn't expecting to love the setting. I didn't play Stalker. I'm not super familiar with it, and I know there's a few people throwing eggs at me from the internet right now. But I bought the game because I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan from the 80s, and I've been building up G.I. Joe and Cobra armies in 156 scale for ever now, and I was looking for a modern skirmish rule set that I could put on the tabletop and use for that background. And then I opened the book and went, well, that initial idea of why I bought this book, I'm throwing it out the window, and I really love where this is going. And I started pulling out all my because one of the factions from that sort of genre was the October Guard, like 1980s Soviets. And I bought a bunch of 1980s Soviet stuff that had been sitting in a box because I was like, I'll get to it after I finish the G.I. Joe and the Cobra stuff. And then I went, turns out I have everything I need for Zona Alpha right here. So I'm just going to put that project on the shelf and pull this out. But I love that you can get a crew painted for this. I'm hoping to have it done in a couple of days. And I'm a slow painter. So this is an easy pickup game. It's not, I know some people are like, oh, I have a tournament next week, and a good friend of the show right now is probably listening, painting highly, because he has a massive event coming up next weekend, and he's been painting for weeks, and he's like, oh, I can't do anything else. I have to paint. But, this is one of those great games that you can pick something up and paint a little bit, as a break after you finish a big project like that, or even if you are on a time schedule, but you want to, paint something different, this is a great reward because, as you say, you can paint between 4 and 9 models and you have yourself a crew.
Right.
So, yeah, easy pickup. Sorry, that was my
again, that's what I'm aiming for. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at a place as a gamer where it's like, I love the idea of gaming, but all the guys that come over here and game, but we don't have time. We have all these other obligations. Yep. Right? You got family, you got work, you got other stuff, and it's like, so, but we love gaming, and so like, what can we do that's quick, that's good, that's fun, that, God forbid, maybe uses models that I already have or models from some other game, Like, why not just slot those in and get them on the table?
Right.
and
Right.
have a good time with them. Right, stat them out, get them on the table. Let's go.
Amen, brother. We
Right.
are so time poor. I don't know. When I was a kid, I had all the time, but I didn't have the money. And now I
That's right.
have, and not that I'm rolling in it. I am a public school teacher, but I have some money, and now I just don't have the time to play the games. And there's so many good
Yeah.
games, but
Yeah.
games like yours that are short, sharp, and you can just get on the table and you can enjoy and you can play. It isn't going to take all day to play. You can sit down and play a good game in a couple of good games in an evening, and have a great time doing it. And boom, that is my kind of game. And again, narrative driven. Well, I did say the G.I. Joe thing just so I could segue into what hooked me about the setting. Again, the pictures and the way that you've sort of written the game has sort of helped set the stage without having to write this. But the missions are very narrative focused, as you've said. So tell us a little bit about how missions are structured and how they work in this game, because it really does set the scene.
All right. So allowing for the individual gamers to create their own scenarios. There's sort of a prompt table in there.
Right.
I can't tell you what page it's on, but it's in there. But every mission in general, every game has a central mission objective, plus a number of hotspots.
Right.
These are locations where there's valuable salvage on the table. Now, so there are different threat levels to the regions that you can explore in the zone. The deeper you go into the zone, closer to the center, the more dangerous it is.
Yeah.
But also there are more hot spots there in the deeper levels of the zone. So these are evenly placed throughout the board. However, whatever size game area you decide, you divide it up into even quadrants, and then you figure out, okay, if I'm playing a threat level 1 area, like on the perimeter of the zone, there's going to be 2 hot spots and a central objective, and I'm going to place them sort of evenly throughout the board. Usually the central objective is in the middle, and then your guys come at it. And so the thing about the hot spots and the central objective is that they spawn, they're like trigger points. They spawn zone hostiles, denizens, inhabitants of the zone, creatures, bandits, criminals, whoever it might be, that will spawn at random and then start to attack the first thing they see, defending that area.
Right.
And we always pass control of the zone hostiles to the other player. So, if I trigger a hotspot, then my opponent is the one who's rolling the dice for the hostiles and controlling their movement.
Right.
I built in something kind of borrowing heavily from the game, where you could toss a bolt. Again, I don't know if you know the game. You can toss a bolt into a hotspot or into an anomaly, and you can trigger it. So the idea behind that was you can toss a bolt like a grenade in a sense, and it triggers the spawning of the zone hostiles. Now the sneaky thing is that they spawn at random, and sometimes they spawn and then they attack your enemy.
Yes.
Your opponent, right? So you can like hide, lob a bolt over a wall, trigger the hotspot, and then a pack of zombies appears and goes right for your opponent. And you're like, ha ha, gotcha, right? So then you can sweep in and you can clear the hotspot and get the salvage out of it.
And that was my next question. And I guess having read the rules, that was the next thing I was going to say is clearing the hotspot is something you want to do and you're rewarded for.
Right. Risk and reward. Yep. So that's a simple way to, introduce incentive, I guess, if I'm going to be technical about it.
Right.
But, to reward the players for gaming. No, so you get more of a reward if you complete the mission objective. But there's not just one objective. Or let's say your opponent, really got a bunch of lucky die rolls and he managed to clear it out. You can still salvage something, pun intended, from the game by clearing some of the hot spots on the peripheral, on the perimeter. Right. So you get a chance to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I have been playing a lot of games recently where, streamlined skirmishy games like Warcry and other games like that, where, one player, gets to win, and then the other person goes, okay, well, it was fun. It was a great gaming experience, but they don't necessarily walk away with anything. But I love that in this game, you do get because there is the missions, you can play linked missions, and there's some character progression, and you can buy things when you go back after the end of a progression of missions to buy things. You can sell your salvage and then buy things with it. As you say, there are consequences for things that happen. There are lasting injuries, but also it's worth going to the effort of doing that. And everyone takes something from the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that was my hope. Again, being a narrative gamer, not a competitive gamer, I'm like, okay, so how do we keep people involved? How do we,
Right.
Make it advantageous for the guy who's like, all right, so I didn't have good, my dice were not with me. I had some bad rolls. I've been down a casualty from the game before, but I can still pull something off out of this game and end up maybe my opponent gets the mission objective, but my hotspot had an anomaly in it. So not only did I get a bunch of salvage and some rolls on the equipment table, but I ended up with an artifact.
Nice.
Right. I got right. And so
Yep.
I ended up actually with more takeaway value than my opponent did.
Right.
Right. And that keeps them in the game. It's not like, haha, I crushed you in one game. That's it. Sucks to be you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're done. Too bad.
Yeah.
It's more like, you can keep playing this. You can come back.
Yeah.
You can play the long game and play smart and then end up with a crew that survives and, go, you bring a bunch of rookies, all the way up to become veterans over the course of a campaign.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, those are my boys right there, right?
And you're invested in them. That's right.
Right. Exactly.
Now, given how deadly the game is, that isn't always going to happen. But
yeah,
yep.
It is a deadly game. It is intentionally a deadly game.
Yeah.
I think it says in the rules, bullets are not your friend.
No.
So you have to play smart. You have to use smoke. You have to use cover.
That's right.
But you can do it. It's doable. Once you shift your mentality from the, hey, let's all run in the middle and have a big rugby scrum.
Exactly.
Right. Let's think a little bit tactically. Let's use some Overwatch. Let's, think about this. It is a very fun game, but you have to shift, to be a little bit more serious on the table.
Now,
especially if you want to preserve your guys.
Yeah,
sorry.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
No. I was gonna say, I love another thing I love about this is that you aren't just playing face to face. It's not like you are sort of competing to get to your objectives and to clear hotspots. But as you pointed out, there's hostiles. You have, and just to go through some of the list, I know you mentioned a few. There's, weird vermin. You have dogs, zombies, ghouls, bandits. You have different varieties of mutants. So there's all kinds of weird and wonderful creatures you can run into when in the zone. And as you say, the further into the zone you go, the more likely you are to run into these. There'll be more hotspots. But also there'll be more of these, so they become more dangerous. And, in a lot of games, you are literally it's just your models and your opponent's models on the board at any given moment. But in this game, there's more. And it really does feel like it gives you a feel for being in a place and not just playing in an empty map where it's just you and your opponent. It isn't necessarily, there's games where, you're playing in the middle of a city and there's no one there and it's an empty, you're like, where did all the citizens of this place go? And while this place, the zone, your universe should be empty of normal people, it should have these hostiles in it. And I like that yours absolutely does. And you have that AI element. It just adds a lot to the game.
Thanks. I mean, again, that's the idea. Like, in the low threat level games, they're kind of a nuisance.
Right.
But once you go deeper, you're like, oh my God, like I could die here. This is dangerous. And so there have been times where opponents have actually worked together to clear a nest of incredibly dangerous hostiles, and then say, okay, all right, you get the kill credits, I'll get the salvage, and then we'll kind of agree to, look the other way and not kill each other here. Because the idea is survival, but it introduces this sort of random element that's on nobody's side, and the control switches from player to player, depending on who is in the line of sight of those zone hostile models.
Right.
And so, again, I was trying to introduce that randomness and that sense of a bigger world, and just create this additional element as much as I could, where you're playing against the environment, you're playing against the board itself.
Right.
It's like a third player in the game that doesn't care about either of you.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Nice. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit. I know we did talk sort of rules a little bit, but I do think it's important mentioning, even though this is a super narrative-focused game, that this is a D10 system. You are using 10-sided dice, which adds just that little extra granularity to the results than a D6 would allow. Was that intentional on your part? Why to D10?
D10 was a good spread of numbers, a little bit more than a D6, not as swingy as, say, a D20.
Right.
And more common than, whatever your D12 or your D8. And so, I did that. That's all I can say about that. It's just that I like the D10. I think it was a fair range of numbers. It allows for some modifiers, but not too many.
Right.
And it's not too swingy. The modifiers actually mean something in a D10, spread.
Yeah, and I'm not a big competitive gamer these days, but I do like when I'm making decisions on the tabletop to think about, well, how possible is what I'm rolling? Should I do this? Should I do that? Would my character do this? Would my character try and do something? And the way that I think about like the possibility of it is I do a little bit of, mental math while I'm doing it. And it's not like I'm sitting there with an abacus, but for me, I mean, D6 systems are easy because I've been doing it for so damn long. I can make some pretty easy decisions. But D10 is nice because I can always think of it as a percentage. I have a 20% chance of this happening. My character clearly doesn't have a line of shot there. He probably wouldn't take that shot. He'd probably move for a better position. And so just having that percentage in my head ballpark gives me an idea of what a character might do, or depends on how desperate they are. So I think D10's great for that.
Because you can also, pin, even if you don't necessarily wound the guy, you can pin him and then just kind of reduce his actions, his ability to act the next turn. Again, that trying to factor that thought in without being too complex. And like you said, granular, but to add a little bit of that flavor, a little bit of that opportunity to okay, I got to move to flank, or I can pin him, or, I definitely don't have that shot, but maybe if I aim, if I use an action to aim to get that +1 bonus, then maybe I can do something here.
Exactly.
So anyway, that was the thought behind the D10.
Now I know I read this, but I not having actually put it on the tabletop, I'm struggling to remember this. So please excuse the question. But with pinning, rookies are more likely to be, are more affected by pins than veterans because the veterans have more activations. Correct?
Correct. And so if you take away the rookie's one action in his next turn, you've essentially pinned him down. Right, you've taken him out of the gameplay the whole next turn.
Right.
Whereas you've inconvenienced the veteran. Right, you've taken away one of his 3 actions. He's got to spend an action to remove the pin. So now you can pin guys multiple times, but yes, that's one of the disadvantages disadvantages. That's one of the choices you make when you elect to take rookies.
Right.
You can, because they can learn and grow and get advances and then get promotions, but you've got to sort of babysit them along and take them through. But if you do that, you'll get rewarded because they'll get advances and they'll grow and they'll end up becoming hardened guys or veterans. But you've got to be smart about it.
Yeah, and I like the way you use the term babysit, and I think that descriptor perfectly matches that situation sometimes, because the zone is a deadly place.
Right, but again, in the narrative story, like, hey, I brought this guy. I remember when this guy was just a green kid, straight into the zone, whatever. And you're like, yeah, but look at him now, right? So that's a little bit of the narrative element to it, where you brought a guy along through 5 or 6 games, and you're like, cool, look at him now.
Yeah. Now, I do love when you're describing in the mission section, and maybe this question should have been when we were talking about missions, but you describe sort of the setting for each mission. I do love that even though this is a very specific setting, there's a wide variety of possible settings within that. So you have a village, you have sort of a wide open vista, you have sort of plants, you have, city blocks. There's quite a few. I don't want people walking away from this thinking that the game is always the same tabletop setup and you just move a few terrain pieces around. There's a lot of really interesting terrain options, and if you look at the Stalker 7 Facebook page, there's some really fantastic ideas of ways that you can make the tabletop interesting and interactive for this game, and not have it always be samey. Which I think is great. And I was initially very surprised by. And, given, I don't know why, I mean, having watched the Chernobyl television series and having read a little bit about the area before the power plant failure, there was a lot of things there. I mean, it was so it's just, it isn't as sort of samey as one might expect. And I just wanted to carefully lay that out there. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Well, I wanted to be respectful. It's a miniatures agnostic game.
Right.
So I want to be respectful of the different gamers that are people. They're going to pick up this game and try and play it with their collection.
Right.
And so I hate it when somebody says, yeah, hey, look, buy my game. Oh, and you have to buy these proprietary tokens, and you have to use this proprietary terrain, and you can only use these miniatures, and you have to buy these special dice with these special symbols on them. But other than that, it's a completely generic game, or whatever it might be. So, and again, not to crash on other game designers. I mean, that's how they want to do it.
Right.
But my thought was, okay, people are going to pick up this game, and I don't know what's in their terrain collection. I don't know what's in their miniature collection. So, swap, if you're like you had mentioned the zone hostiles earlier. If you don't have zombies, use spiders. I don't care. It doesn't matter if that's what you have. So if you are like, hey, I've got a bunch of woodland terrain, but I don't have a lot of ruined urban terrain, or vice versa, fine, use that. Create a zone that way. Or you say, gosh, I have Western armies, not Soviet flavored. Fine, do it. Go run with that too.
Exactly.
It's really okay. Fit this game to your collection and your preferences.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that was the thought there.
Yeah, and it's great to see, and you are part of a growing number of game designers who are creating sort of miniature agnostic games that are so inclusive and allow people to, if you have sort of a weird and wonderful collection of miniatures like some of us do, that we're able to just pull it out and get going. Well,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get them. Yeah. We're going to talk about Hardwired later, but that was sort of the impetus behind Hardwired, which is like, I have all these cool random miniatures. How can I put them to use?
Well, actually, that was my next question. So I know that this may be the first game that some people know that you've put out, but you put out a game previous to this, a game called Hardwired, and we've mentioned it a few times, but it's a cyberpunk game, yes?
Yep, it's a cyberpunk game. Again, I game with a good group of guys, and a lot of them come from a role-playing, D&D background. And we had we rotate, different games in the schedule. And so somebody had just run a RPG campaign, a cyberpunk RPG campaign using Savage Worlds.
Nice.
And then prior to that, we had done some D&D, some 5th edition. And so I really liked everybody cooperating on the table around a single story. And then it was coming around to like, okay, it's Pat's turn. Pat wants to get, some miniature carnage on the tabletop. Let's get back to tabletop wargaming.
Right.
But I thought, okay, how can I kind of grab that feeling of the cooperation? And so I came up with this and I love the game Pandemic.
Great
where
game,
you play
right?
against where you're playing against the table.
Yeah.
Playing against the board. So I wrote this simple set of rules using polyhedral dice set sort of as an action pool,
Mm-hmm.
and then where everybody around the table is part of a cyberpunk crew that has to, perform a mission.
Yeah.
And you have these waves of enemy security, hostile security, coming in from random spawning points at the edges of the table,
Mm-hmm.
trying to stop you from escorting your VIP or from stealing that data chip or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be. And so we just had fun with it. And so that's how Hardwired came about. It's a solo, it's meant to be a cooperative, but you can play it solo cyberpunk game, where you can slot any cool miniature you have, this random from your random selection.
Mm-hmm.
You can fit them into a class, give them some skills, create a mission, and then off you go. You're running.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I love that it's got solo elements as well that really, they're just so, I mean, as you say, time is an issue these days. And sometimes, coordinating with other people is really hard. But there are nights where, my wife might go out and I'm home with the dogs. And usually that means I'm podcasting these days. But there are still those nights where I'm like, I could set up and play a game. But if I don't have one, well, I guess I'll do something else. And don't get me wrong, painting's great, but sometimes you just have that itch to play a game and you just can't find someone to play with. So having a good, solid solo rule set is always good to have up the sleeve.
Yeah, thanks. I did just finish and send an addendum to Osprey regarding solo play and co-op play for Zona Alpha.
Ooh.
So some guidelines for that. It's just a couple of pages that sort of a rules tweak, and then Soren, the guy from Bloodbeard's Garage, he had a couple of house rules that I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I spoke with him and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I, all credit where credit is due? We'll put it. I'll include these in the solo and co-op, guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was all for it. So I just sent those off to Osprey. They're going to probably convert it to a PDF and put it up on the website soon. It'll be free.
Awesome.
Again, it's just a couple of pages, but it's just something to let gamers, play on their own.
Oh, man. Yes.
I have on tap, sort of in the back of my mind, this little 5-part linked campaign that's made especially for solo play, where your crew in Zona Alpha is trying to stop some nefarious corporation from detonating a nuclear device in the middle of the zone.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the choice to either help them do it or try and stop them from doing it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, well,
cool.
It's there. I just got to get the time to write it, hammer it out.
I hear you. I hear you. Make sure it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm assuming that all that information or the PDF that you're talking about with Osprey will be shared on Stalker 7 as well. So
it will. I wanted to send it to Osprey first,
Oh, absolutely.
But then, of course, I'll put it up in the next couple of days. So
sweet. I can't wait, man. Because I'm, as I said, I literally primed my crew this morning. I'm ready to rock and roll, or I will be. So.
Right on.
Ooh, yeah. Oh, cool. That's awesome. I love, and that actually brings me to my last question, which was, what's the future hold? And sounds like you are chugging along. You have plans for this.
I do, but I'm not sure. I can't speak for Osprey. I don't know how expansions do for blue books and things like that. Right. I know that I'm going to keep, putting out ideas and content and stuff as it occurs to me, just because I love the game and I love the setting.
Yeah.
I'm also working on a fantasy version of Hardwired.
Ooh.
That has campaigns and experience, sort of integrates the idea of the advances in XP from Zona Alpha, but keeps those core Hardwired dice mechanics. And keeps, again, it's a simple game that's miniatures agnostic, that's designed to get you, you can use any fantasy miniature you have, slot it in, get it on the table and get playing. You can read it in an afternoon and be playing that night.
That's cool.
Now, I'm working on it.
So. Where are we going to find out more information about that? Will that also be on Stalker 7, or are we going to?
I don't know.
Not sure yet.
I put a couple of posts up on the Stalker 7 about the game. I posted some pictures of one of the first test games the other day, and our heroes pulled off a last-minute win, which was good. because they were just being swarmed by vermin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not at a stage where it's, fit for public consumption yet,
Cool.
but I'm working on it. And as details become apparent, yeah, I will release more information.
Well, that's the cool thing, man. It means you're clearly playtesting it and you're making sure it's right before you put it out for the world. And that, I don't think anyone can complain about. I mean, I know in the olden days, we would just go, okay, cool. When is it coming out? Cool, great. But to actually have someone who's, especially when it's just you and your gaming group, and then I'm sure you have other playtesters, but to make sure that things are right before you put them out is something that all of us can appreciate.
Yeah, I'd say to the guys, okay, so here's some rules. Let's try and break them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to make sure that they work. So that's what we do when we play test. And
Sweet.
Again, we didn't get everything with Zona Alpha or with, whatever, but we got a lot of them. And
Yes.
so I'm reasonably confident that the game works.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
Nice. Well, mate, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And, Pat, I cannot wait to get the models on the tabletop and push them around. And this just seems like such a novel and interesting new setting for me. I know it's not new for some people, but it looks like exactly of everything I've wanted in a skirmish game. So on behalf of the greater gaming community, I know a lot of people who bought this game locally knew I was talking to you today, and a bunch of them said, tell them thanks. And so thank you. We really do enjoy it, and please keep up the good work.
Hey, man, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, and you're more than welcome. It's a genuine pleasure, and I'm honored, and I'm like humbled just to be part of it and be able to give something back.
Right on, brother. Right
on. All right, so one final thing.
Yes, sir.
Nobody, did you read my bio in the rule book?
Yes, I read the beginning. Yes, about your father, who took you, or your stepfather, who took you to minifigs.
Yeah, to minifigs. Yeah, and I also set my game table on fire.
What? I missed that. How did you do that?
Okay, so yeah, there are very few people that know this story. But I'm sharing it with you, so
and
you
the
can
internet.
edit it in. Yeah, edit it in as you need it. So, there I was like 13 years old. I really got into American, AWI, American War of Independence, the American Revolutionary figs, right? So I had this room in my parents' basement, with this one little window, that little basement window that's down in the well.
I had that
right?
same
So
room.
Like a little bit of light.
Yep.
Yeah, right? Only when the light is just right.
Yep.
So I had built like all these little farmhouses, and I had all these little trees out of, the scale model railroad trees, and I had all these farmhouses built out of cardboard and stuff, and then I had these little matchstick fences. And what I did once after
flammable.
My collection had been built up, I turned off all the lights in that little room, and I recreated a British raid on an American town where they burned the barns and stuff. So what I did was I stole some matches from my mom, and I turned out all the lights, and I set up all the guys, and I lit all the buildings on fire. And then I got down and looked at it eye level from every angle. Yeah. With all the lights out, and it looked like a night raid. Yeah. Right, with the British lining, the red coats and the big bearskin shako hats, and the American colonists hiding in the woods and stuff like that. So it looked really cool for about 5 minutes. And then until the room started to fill up with smoke, and then I got in a lot of trouble. Yeah. Yes. But it looked really cool for about 5 minutes. Oh. So anyway, that's how I set my game table on fire. Yeah. And now you know. There you go. And I thought I got in trouble at that age when I was spray painting my first set of fantasy science fiction bunkers that I'd made out of styrofoam. And it spent forever building them and gluing them and, cutting them meticulously. And I'm sure they look like garbage, but at the time I was so proud of them and I thought they were the greatest things I'd ever done. And then, Boston in the winter, I was up to my knees in snow and went, I can't wait to prime these. I got to do it now. And so primed them in my parents' living room.
not knowing that spray paint melts styrofoam and the fumes. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, parents were not happy about that. And since my parents' house looks more like a museum than a home, not a great moment. Anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good. Right on.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We all have our gaming moments as a kid.
Yeah, right?
Right
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Well,
all right, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Well, hold on. Pat, thank you so much for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're listening to this, if you want to find out more, please go to Stalker7 on Facebook. Pat, where can we find Hardwired if folks want to find that? And I know a bunch of people will.
Okay, the Hardwired game and the expansion are both available on Amazon and a War Game Vault in print and electronically.
Nice.
So, and they're short money, so...
And yeah, guys, if you haven't checked out, I've been going to War Game Vault for quite a while. I know that friend of the show, Dave Monroe, often gets a lot of stuff from there. There's some awesome games and some awesome game resources on there. If you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth a look on a lunch break one day. They just have so many cool things that are just wonderful gaming resources. So War Game Vaults for role-playing and for just tabletop games. Tons of great stuff on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's a wonderful opportunity for game developers to put things online too that wouldn't normally have that opportunity to have things fully hardback published, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that brings us to the end of this episode. I haven't mentioned this in a while, but I do think it is worth mentioning. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say thank you again. So many people have messaged me in the new year with awesome messages saying that they've recently found the show. If you're listening to this and it's your first time listening to Cast Dice, thank you very much. Please enjoy the back catalog. It is there and hopefully isn't going away anytime soon. There's a lot of great games that we talk about in there and just weird and interesting conversations. So thank you for listening. I know that podcasts don't cost money, but time is often more precious than money, as we talked about earlier in this episode. And the fact that you took the time to listen to this today it means a lot. So thank you for taking the time to listen to Cast Dice today. And as our good buddy Casey says, ladies and gentlemen, when you are playing the games that we know and love, I hope your dice roll hot. I hope your beverages are cold. But more than anything else, we at Cast Dice hope that you are having fun. Good night.
Another day rise in Paraguayan sun. The food cracks open. Another Heineken. He's all alone. He's in his little room. He's all alone with a Burmese python and a loaded and then try